Okay. Welcome to this Tillich Explains Finance video. This week I want to take on a topic that I have looked at before, but we now have up-to-date data on, and that is the private education challenge. And I'm suggesting it can be, for some couples, a £1 million challenge. Now that, to anybody, sounds like an awful lot of money, perhaps more than you were thinking of. So let's take a look at where that comes from, how big the challenge actually is now in 2019, 2020, and what parents can do about it. One of the key parts. So, background is what? Well, the CEBR have given us a set of data basically that suggests that £905,600 is the cost of a private education on average in the UK, assuming 2 children, one starting in 2017, so they've started, one 2019, boarding in both cases from the age of 13. Now lots of assumptions there, so day school up to 13, boarding from the age of 13. Obviously if they board earlier, that actually goes up, that number. If they don't board, it comes down a bit, as we'll see later, but that's a pretty hefty bill. Now where do I get the £1 million from on the title slide? Well, the answer is at 4.4%, the average rate of inflation for boarding schools in 2018, 3.2% for day schools. You can see that in a few years' time, that will be easily over £1 million. To put that in context, as if I have to, that's a lot more than some people will ever pay on their property mortgage, for example. It's getting up close to what people might be thinking about putting into a pension. So it's a pretty sizable number, whichever way you look at it. Now, is it getting worse? Unfortunately it is. So another way of looking at this, projected increases in day school fees, taking a long time horizon, so you can see a pattern, 1990, so that's the past, all the way through to 2032, the future, 8.2 times. The projected increase in boarding school fees, pretty similar, so you've got day schools on the left, boarding schools on the right, same period, 8.4 times. And if you're thinking, sounds quite a lot, what do I compare it to? The answer is a good benchmark would be projected inflation, CPI inflation, at 2.5 times over that same long period. So it's a problem and it's getting worse. So we need to look at ways to solve it in a moment. Now the financial impact. The report I'll reference at the end gives lots and lots of data, lots of examples of how this can impact different groups according to income and so on. So I'll just take a snapshot here. 39% of the typical doctor that is, average UK doctors, disposable income, keyword disposable income, is required for educational costs at the moment. That's an average number, but it's pretty chunky. Goes up to 64% of the median salary across what are called professional occupations. That is doctors, accountants, lawyers. I'm not saying it's an exclusive club, only those people can send their kids to private school, but that's a group of reasonably high earning people, couples and so on. So you can see that's a big chunk of even a decent salary hoovered up in private education costs. And in 2019, average fees were around £15,000 per child, to give you an actual number. That will vary. In London, it can go up to quite a bit more than that, near £20,000. Then there are the extras. And this is the bit people forget about. They look on the website potentially, talk to the school, get the headline rate, forget about the extras. So whilst that's an average number, it's quite a big extra average number. So what's in there? Well, wait for it. Uniforms and equipment. My niece goes to a private school in southeast London. She had to buy no fewer than 6 specified hats. Not even sure I can name 6 different types of hat. And they all had to come from a certain place for a certain price. Uniforms and equipment can get expensive, and of course kids grow, so you have to change them quite often. School trips is another one. So another member of our family has just been on a hockey trip with his private school to Chile, 3-week tour. In my day, it was Brecon for a week if you were lucky. That is expensive, and that's not in that headline £15,000 or £18,000 bill. And then the hidden one that a lot of people don't see coming, and that is that, ironically enough, private school terms are usually shorter than state school terms. The day is usually longer, but the terms are shorter, and that means higher costs. Not just the fact you'll be going on holiday at expensive times like half term and Easter, but the holidays you've got to cover with childcare will be longer. Now, ways to bring down the bills. It's a little bit depressing, you might say, so far. It sounds like a lot of money. So let's look at ways that it could be reduced. Now, some of these are controversial in the sense that not all families will want to take my ideas, but they are at least worth discussing, because £1 million is, by any standards, in any household, a lot of money. So let's take a look at it. Day school fees for 2 children. 2017-2019 starts is the assumption. Average, well, it's still a pretty big number, £629,300 versus the best part of £1 million. So one way to do it would be to send your kids to day school all the way through, not do the boarding option from the age of 13. But easy for me to say, all depends on your family educational strategy. Then there's sending a school to state school until the age of 8. That's a common inflection point, as is 11, another common inflection point. That will save on average, the 8 inflection point, 63,500. Waiting till 11, then going down the same path I mentioned before, will save about £120,000, just shy of. Now, lots of assumptions in there. Do you want to send your kids to a state primary school, then a private secondary school? Can you even find the right type of primary school? It's better to do it that way around, in my opinion, by the way. What you don't really want to do, and I've spoken to a lot of people about this, is to put kids into private primary school and then pull them out to go to a state secondary school. That could be seen as a little bit unfair, but there is the option, potentially, depending on what area you live in, to go private primary and then switch. Sorry, state primary and then switch into private secondary later. And that will knock some money off the bill. Then there are bursaries. So quite a few children do qualify for various different reasons for bursaries. It's always worth asking the question, are there bursaries in place? Who might qualify for them? Well, that's a way of bringing down the bill at the school that you choose. But that needs a discussion directly with the school in terms of how that works. Paying up front. Now, if you're fortunate enough to think, actually, I have got the capital available, maybe from inheritance, who knows where it's come from, to be able to just actually think about paying school fees up front, for those people in that fortunate position, that can work quite well. Because what schools will often do, private schools, is take a lump sum to cover all the school fees going forward. They discount it compared to what you'd pay on a pay-as-you-go basis, because with charitable status, they can invest it tax efficiently and make a bit of a turn on the money, if that makes sense. So they're able to offer that discount. But you may not have the money, is the first point, the most obvious point. And even if you do, be careful, because there may be a penalty that applies if you change your mind and pull your kids out of the school later. You'll probably lose any interest you might have earned on the money in the meantime. So that all needs weighing up. Then there's what I call help from above. So maybe there are people further up the family chain willing to help with school fees. School fees is quite a nice one because it gives grandparents, for example, the ability to actually tangibly contribute to their grandchildren's future rather than just sort of handing over money or waiting. Education is something they need. It's tangible. They can see the benefits of it, if you like. And the timing is known. As soon as a child is born, you know exactly when they'll be 8, 11, 18, and you can estimate the amounts based on some of the numbers I popped up earlier. Won't be a perfect estimate, but it is one of those foreseeable calls on capital, as we call it, that can be planned for relatively easily. What about relocating? So for some people, this sounds extreme, but there are people who will consider this option. It's a case of, I cannot afford necessarily to do private school for 2 children where I currently live, for argument's sake in London, so how am I going to solve this one? Well, there are significant regional variations in private school fees. So some people do relocate lock, stock and barrel to a different part of the country where they can see a good school where the fees are a bit lower. London is 17%, by the way, above the average in 2019, so there is a big London waiting on school fees. It was only 12% in 2000, so that's getting worse. And options may include moving or 2 bases. Now, 2 bases just means there are people out there. It's a big decision. It has knock-on effects for family life. There are people who will buy a home, let's say a decent distance away from London, put their kids through a school near to that home, and then the person who's the breadwinner in the family will base themselves in London, Oxford, wherever it might be, and commit to spending the 3-4 nights required to get the day job done in the process. Big decision, has ramifications wider than just how do I pay for school fees, but I put it out there as something that can be weighed up. So key questions for parents. Let's just bring it down to a few concluding questions that parents should ask themselves. How important is a private education and why are you thinking of doing it? Is it peer pressure that's driving you to send your kids to a private school? Is it the fact you went and you feel like the family tradition should be continued? I'm not saying those are invalid reasons to send kids to private school, but think about what's best for the children, ultimately. A lot of people lose sight of that and tend to think about what's best for them or what has been best for the family in the past. What total support are we going to offer? Because this will influence whether you think you realistically can afford to send 2 kids to private school. Because are you then going to be paying for university costs, and how much? Are you then going to be putting a deposit down on their first home? And if the answer is yes, you need to map out the full chain of expenditure that you might be looking down the barrel of before making the decision. And are we covered if something goes wrong? That's a practical point. Given that potentially two of you could be working full-time to bring in enough money to generate the school fees that you need, is it worth looking at, have we got backstops and insurance in place in the event that something goes wrong and we suddenly find ourselves with an income gap, for example? Okay, to find out more, and if you'd like some more data on some of that private school fee stuff, there's a report available, and there's also my How to Save and Invest for Your Family guide. Those two things can be grabbed at editor@killick.com, and if you'd like to watch videos around some of the tax-efficient savings routes to pay for things like school fees, it's killick.com/learn down here, tax-effective savings.